the podcast spotlighting women who are redefining the face of tech, innovation, and leadership. I'm your host, Dee. Today I'm joined by Violet Snell, a seasoned machine learning engineer and researcher with a career spanning both academia and industry. Currently leading machine learning at Acusensus, Violet has previously held leadership roles at iProof and Genoptic, where she's built teams, authored patents, and pushed the boundaries of AI in visual recognition. But Violet's impact goes beyond tech. She's a passionate advocate for women in STEM, a mentor, a public speaker, and someone who's deeply committed to reshaping cultural barriers in the industry. In this episode, we explore Violet's journey through engineering, the role of education in shaping female representation in STEM, and why simply removing barriers isn't enough to create real equity in tech.
So let's dive in. Violet, welcome to the podcast. How's everything going? It's really
great.
Lovely to have you too, Violet. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really excited to go through some of these questions so we can dive into more about your background. But could you maybe start off with taking us on a brief journey of your career to date?
Sure. So I started off with an Oxford engineering and computer science degree. So they have a very broad engineering degree covering lots of aspects of engineering, but this one was specializing all the optional bits on computer science. So that set me up for a nice broad background, but also with a good specialism. And I started working as a programmer in the holidays before I finished uni. And I think that's quite important as a good base for a career. And generally, I've found people who have done internships and just have experience of what it looks like in real life to use this academic knowledge for some actual application and purpose. They're then in a much better place to absorb what they're learning in their studies. So I think that the two really play off each other and interact well. So I think that set me up for a good start. I then worked for a very long time in one place, which was originally a family company, in video and image processing. And I moved between research roles and software development roles. So I was kind of able to bridge that gap and understand both the rigors of producing production software, but also the need for exploration and trying out lots of new things on the research side. So I think that's kind of worked well for me as a background for the next stage of my career. So after really a long time in industry, more than 10 years, I went back to university to do a PhD as a mature student. So at some point I ran out of growth room in what I could do in industry and needed an extra new step up. And that's the point where I discovered for myself the excitements of machine learning and AI. So I did a PhD in computer vision at the University of Surrey at a great lab called CVSSP, Centre for Vision, Speech and Signal Processing. And that really kind of opened new horizons for me. One of the things that I did in the latter part of my PhD was a teaching qualification, a sort of lecturing qualification, and then actually briefly went into lecturing at universities. So that's given me a perspective on how academia works as compared to industry. I personally found myself much more comfortable back in industry than teaching in academia, and that's where I've been ever since. But I use a lot of the skills that I've picked up in that academic training back in how I approach my leadership positions in industry.
And, how has that kind of experience with academia and also being in the industry kind of shaped your leadership style and your roles?
So my leadership style, I think, is best described as Socratic. I don't believe that I have all the answers and I just need to tell my reports how to do it. I think that can be the case with less experienced people, but I still want to have a conversation with them because I believe that there are things they know that I don't. And there are perspectives that they can bring that will make for a better answer overall. So my leadership style is very much about questioning things and then in kind of joint exploration, finding the answers, coming out with better solutions and better answers all round. But it also, the academic training has provided me with a lot of the presentation skills that I use to provide the kind of visionary leadership, not just for my team, but for broadly the organization that I'm part of, to be the advocate for AI and what AI can do, and you must be careful what it can't do, and explaining that to people, giving them a bit more of an understanding of how it works and therefore what its limitations but also strengths might be. So that those skills come from the academic side.
I think I find that I speak to so many leaders all the time, and the ones who have been successful, like yourself, in leading teams have always been the ones who have said, I don't ever pretend to know I know everything. And I'm open to even people more junior than me to tell me things that I likely don't know. And I think that is definitely a very important way of growing as a leader as well, because once you're a leader, you're not just, that's not it. It's a continuous growth, isn't it?
Yeah. We need to, as leaders, we need to exercise that leadership of going ahead and stepping out into the unknown, perhaps, and making the decisions so that the people in our teams can follow that path. We do need to trailblaze to a certain degree, but we very much need to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the AI side of things that you've kind of talked about, and we talked about previously as well, what kind of drew you to that world of AI?
I think so I started out in image and video processing on a sort of hereditary basis. My dad worked in television and signal processing, and that's kind of the environment I grew up in. I was taught how to do fast Fourier transforms at the kitchen table so that I could code them up for my dad, so that he could go into the office after the Christmas holidays and go, oh, look, I've done this. But the kind of building the machine learning on top of that image and vision expertise, I think it was the capabilities that drew me to it, and what it was able to achieve in terms of automation, things that without would be very difficult become plausible with AI. So, for example, I did my PhD research in the area of medical imaging and specifically microscopy. So you'd have a tissue sample that a pathologist would examine under a microscope to determine whether it's cancerous or some other disease and what grade of disease they have. And that pathologist would be trained for 6 years and would be in very short supply. So that limits what you can do. Whereas if you can, at least to some extent, automate that, suddenly people can have better healthcare answers quicker. So that's the potential of AI that drew me to it. The surprise when I got there, when I started my PhD, was that it was all stats. And stats was not my favorite area of mathematics before then, and I was not expecting it. But there you go. So now I'm a bit more of an advocate for stats as well.
I think generally speaking, I struggled with maths. So I think I would have definitely have been frightened by stats as well. And I do appreciate anyone who could do that.
Yeah. I've always loved maths, but my original schooling didn't cover stats well, and I've always been a little bit scared of it. And it is very easy to get wrong. So I'm, definitely relate to anyone who feels frightened of stats. They're right to approach it with caution.
I think going off topic a little bit, trigonometry was something everyone hated at school, but it was actually the one thing that I actually quite enjoyed and I was quite good at.
Oh yeah,
Very strangely.
Yes.
But kind of, I guess moving on to the topic of hiring side of things, because I know that you also mentioned when we had a chat before that, you've been quite heavily involved in the hiring, building teams side of things. And in terms of kind of inclusivity, what does that look like? What does inclusive hiring look like to you in practice and, beyond just the policies?
Yes, it's a good question. I think it's very important to be intentional in making your hiring inclusive. You do need to think about it upfront, and some organizations will write the policies but not necessarily put them into practice. So I think you're right to be questioning what the practice of it looks like. I've certainly found quite a strong effect from how adverts are worded. So I would always review those for anything that sounds a bit more bombastic and ambitious and pressured and heroic, and those are things that tend not to attract women, shall we say. I have also found it very positive to have women on any interview panel. Again, that takes some intentionality and some planning from organizations. It's not necessary. I think if the men who are on the panel are aware that if they're interviewing a woman, that they need to approach it differently, and they've been trained and they know what biases to look out for in themselves and in the people they're interviewing, then that they can also contribute to combating those biases. If they're reviewing CVs and they know that if the candidate is female, they're likely to undersell themselves and their achievement, as opposed to a man who is much more likely to overstate their capabilities and achievement, then they know that the two CVs that look roughly the same, but one is a man and one is a woman, is likely to lead to very different actual outcomes of interview, and they should rate those differently. So they can compensate even at CV review stage if they're aware of those biases and how men and women behave differently and present themselves differently. And similarly, if they know that the sort of confidence levels that they might see in an interview might be affected by gender, then they can allow more for those and compensate for them in their judgments and assessments. But I would also add that it's not just about gender. I think the inclusivity in an intersectional sense goes so much further. And so a lot of it is about treating the candidates as individuals, trying to understand them fully, starting with the basics of what their gender is and what country they come from, and then what their experience and background is, but just trying to get as much information in that very limited time that you have in an interview to get a fuller picture of them as a person. Because you're going to work with them for months and years, right? It is such a precarious activity, hiring. You have so little information to go on, and it is such guesswork. So I have been an advocate for taking probation really seriously and supporting your probationers through the process, but not taking it as a done deal because you're starting with such limited information to begin with.
Yeah, and I wonder, because I had these conversations about what an interview process should look like as well. Would you say that provided there is like a HR in place in a company, because sometimes some startups don't have a HR function, it's usually outsourced. Would you say that it's always a good idea to have an initial HR screening for a cultural fit perspective? Because I guess they have more training in that regard about, they'd be the ones to train about biases, right? Most of the time for hiring managers. What would be your thoughts on that?
I have worked in organizations that have both types of practice, where there is an HR culture fit type screen first and where there isn't. I think that is perhaps more about saving time for the hiring manager and filtering out those that are actually not going to fit into the organization in some other respect, rather than some kind of boon to inclusivity, particularly. What I have found very effective as a hiring practice that nets you more women is targeting your CV review at the women you've got. Really, really trying to put as many of those through as you can. I've been involved in recent graduate recruitment programs where we've just said, right, let's just look at the girls. We have enough of them because there are so many applicants to a graduate position that we can. And then you find some absolute gems in there. So just that, prioritizing the female candidates that you have in your review stages and really targeting them really does work and bring results and brilliant hires.
I think in doing that, it really could help bring out the best in an individual when you do give more opportunities to women, because I think a lot of the times people who kind of may feel like they can't apply to a job, like you said about the job description having that sort of bombastic language, it can almost make them quite nervous in the process, in the interview process.
Well, even before you get to the interview, it's a very well-known fact that women will only apply if they, in their own mind, in their own view, fulfill 100% of the listed requirements, whereas men will apply if they can barely scrape over half, right? So that there are all those pre-filters in terms of what applications you get. So you then, if you take that into account, and you get the applications I have got from women are likely to be of a much higher grade, I really need to take those much more seriously and focus in on those, because they're likely to net me results.
Yeah, I've seen those job descriptions. We see them often, whereby at the bottom it will say, even if you don't fulfill all of these requirements, please still apply. And I think that when I see that, the likelihood is it's a great company.
Yeah, I agree. I personally find those effective. I am more likely to consider applying for things that say that at the bottom, very much. Yeah. But it was also how you structure your requirements when you write them. If you put the absolute minimum under the title of requirements and put everything else under a heading of nice to haves, optional extra bonus points, then you are reducing the bias that women are going to impose on themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about the kind of grads as well briefly. I mean, what role do you think, what can schools or universities do in helping more girls see that kind of tech as a space that they belong to or in?
I think by the time they reach university, it's kind of they've either already won or it's already too late, right? Either they are doing a technical degree, in which case great, or they're not, in which case this is where programs like Code First Girls step in to retrain them into tech careers. And I'm a big supporter of Code First Girls and a past instructor, and I think those kind of initiatives are really valuable. I think if we really want to change things culturally, they need to start at a much younger age. And it's primary school that you can see the biases setting in. As just an example from my personal experience, I ran a chess club at my children's primary school, and I have two children, a boy and a girl. And I initially set it up for the older boy to play chess with his mates after school hours. But the little girl had to tag along because, that's what mummy was busy with. And when I asked her little girlfriends and their mums whether any of them wanted to join in, the answers I got were along the lines of, they don't think that it's a girl thing to do. And these were 5-year-olds, and they'd already got from somewhere this idea that chess wasn't for girls. So you really want to do this as early as you can. And then the other thing that is kind of structurally built into the schooling system that really doesn't help matters is the age at which students are asked to pick their subjects and reduce their subject choices, and that's sort of that 12, 13, choose your GCSEs kind of age, where they tend to first separate into girls doing more humanities and boys doing more technical things. And that is very unfortunate, because it's not actually girls not wanting to do the technical things or not being capable of doing the technical things. It's actually to do with boys having a bit of a developmental delay at that point in terms of their verbal communication and their ability to do humanities. And so they choose to go into the things that they feel stronger at, which is the more mathematical, logical side of things. And then once the boys have all piled in there, then they start, as a secondary effect, to essentially displace the girls, and girls don't want to be in a room full of sweaty boys or whatever. So what you find is in separate gender schools, so if you've got a girls only school, there is no problem with the number of girls doing physics. Whereas in a mixed school, that effect very much takes place, and you will have very, very few girls in subjects like physics. So it's almost like it's another reason to support the diamond schooling system, where the diamond schooling system, you're looking puzzled, is where you have mixed gender schooling through primary, and then it splits into separated gender schooling for middle school for secondary, and then they come together again for A-level stage, for college stage, by which point they've matured enough that they can cope with it. But in terms of how well they will do within the education system, separate schooling at that kind of age bracket of early teens is actually beneficial. There you go. I didn't think I would be promoting that, but that's what the research supports.
I think I've seen reports. So I have a brother who's quite younger than me, and when we were looking for secondary schools, we did a little deep dive of all the schools around, and it actually did turn out that that kind of diamond method is very much it did produce the best results.
For boys as well as for girls.
Yeah, for boys as well as girls. And yeah, so I can totally see that. And like you said, it's not something ideally you want to promote, but it just seems like the stats do say it does work.
But for that age group, it is helpful. I did a little research project as part of my teaching qualification where I looked at the girls who did make it to university doing technical subjects and looked into what do they report as the factors that allowed them to come through all the barriers. And one of the common factors between them was that they had gone to an all-girls school.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the kind of things I remember that got me interested in things like science was, I think I randomly just came across this page in a book, in one of our science books about Marie Curie, and I got really interested. And that kind of brings me to the topic of like, role models, and how we don't, and no one ever talked about it in class, but it was in our actual book to study for the exam. But yeah, we never actually discussed it. And I think those sorts of figures are so important to bring forward. But do you think they're enough, or would you say there's something else more important when it comes to representation?
So the other thing that emerged in my little research study was that it wasn't role models so much as I would call them champions. So the girls that made it had some kind of authority figure in their life that believed and gave to them the belief that being female was in no way a barrier to doing technical things. That of course they could do it, and being a girl was no detriment to that whatsoever. And that person could be a parent, and that parent didn't have to be a role model in the sense that they worked in tech themselves or that they were female working in tech. So they were not modeling the role, but they were carriers of this underlying belief that there was no reason that the girl couldn't do it, that being a girl was no reason for not doing it. And it could be a teacher, so it could be some kind of inspirational group figure from school, but it seemed less about role models that can be a bit more distant and up on a pedestal. So role models can be almost counterproductive, because the reaction can be, but she's so clever, she's so that, I could never do that. And that's not what you're looking for at all. You're looking for somehow spreading throughout the culture the assumption that being a girl is no detriment. I come from a culture where that is the case. I never doubted as a youngster that my being a girl would somehow stop me being good at maths.
Yeah, I think it's having that role model almost seems like, oh, that's the exception, and actually,
exactly. Role models, people put up as role models, can be very exceptional. That's why they're chosen. But actually, their very exceptionality is what then reduces their value in how much majority of people can relate to them.
Yeah, and when you remove that, it becomes, I guess, less of a barrier, and it just makes you focus on what you need to do as opposed to what I need to become. And just really hone in on your own niche almost, create your own identity in the industry, right? Because I guess that's what, men are doing, I think, in tech. I don't think they have role models per se. I think they just kind of get on with it. I've never spoken to anyone who's actually mentioned that they have a role model in tech.
I think very, very few. Yeah.
Unless they mention Elon Musk, and in that case, that's a whole nother topic.
Yes. Yes.
But kind of, I guess, revisiting the AI conversation we had earlier as well. How do you approach the ethical responsibility of building those AI products that affect people's safety or privacy?
I think that there is a massive responsibility, of course, but I think that responsibility rests with the entire organization that is producing a product or a service that includes AI, and not just with the AI technologists, if you like, that are building that part directly. Yes, of course, they have to exercise responsibility and think about the ethical impacts, just like any technology can have social and ethical impacts, and the people building it need to think about them. But I think the role of the technologist in this, as I see it, is to explain the implications and the limitations to the rest of their organization, and particularly senior management, make them aware. But the leaders of an organization overall need to be taking responsibility for the effects of the AI they're building, would be my take on it. I do think that AI is no different from any other technology in that, nuclear power is a great boon to humanity. Nuclear bombs, not so much. The technology, the science underlying it is the same. So what you deploy and apply a technology to is a choice, and we need to be careful about the choices we make with regard to any technology, and very much for AI, because the impact can be huge.
And when you have teams that are building AI, would you give any consideration to how important diverse perspectives are and what the risks might be when they're not represented?
I think that there is an impact. So when there are biases in AI systems, to give an example relevant to our topic, if there is some kind of AI system sorting CVs of applicants and it applies gender-related biases to it, there are ways of mitigating a bias like that in an AI system. But naturally, to begin with, it will just be reproducing what it sees in the original data, right? The AI systems are mimics. So if we as humans have built up a history of CV review decisions that are biased against women, then a kind of a basic AI system will simply reproduce that. But in order to apply the mitigation and make that AI system better, you need to have spotted the bias in the first place. You need to have checked for it, right? And if the people building it are not diverse and representative themselves, they're likely to be blind to that bias. they will simply not spot its existence. To give you a very recent example from my current employer, we had a presentation recently about adoption of AI tools within the company for all sorts of other kind of support functions, not the AI product that we build ourselves, but code support tools or writing documentation and such like. And the corporate presentation had lots of AI generated pictures illustrating AI adoption, cartoon figures. And it took me to point out that every single one of them was male, except for the last one that was representing an executive and was a lady in a suit with pearl earrings and glasses to make up for her not being a man. And as it happens, my male colleagues were very receptive to me highlighting that, and they were interested to see the bias, but they wouldn't have seen it had my eyes not opened it to them, if you like.
And it's almost like it's right there,
And they actually then tried to address the biases and get the AI to produce better illustrations and whatever, and it was quite hard to get it to produce a more diverse and representative picture of a team that included women that were not wearing high heels. That was a bit too hard.
And like you're saying, if that's the audience who uses AI, and there's that exactly, and that's what it produces.
And then it having those perspectives, diverse perspectives in the team, is very valuable in spotting the existence of the biases in the first place, and then you can do something about them. Until you recognize them, you will not do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your perspective on that as well. But when we talked a little bit about kind of mentoring and the kind of leadership, you mentioned like Code First Girls, for example. And I know you've mentored and supported a lot of women in tech. What would you say are some small but powerful things both mentors and leaders can do to support those kind of early career women?
Once they're in, once they've gotten through all the hurdles and got as far as a career in tech, it's a very good question. And I think resonating sort of in line with that previous point about having champions who believe that being a woman is no barrier, I think it's along similar lines. It is voicing, articulating, making explicit that you as leader, as mentor, see no reason why they, just because they are female, are not in any way capable of succeeding in a technical role and in a sort of technology function, while at the same time recognizing that as women they face additional hurdles. It's a kind of, it seems almost contradictory, but it isn't. It's saying that there isn't anything inherent to you that makes you less capable, but I as leader recognize that you face additional challenges, and I am willing to support you through those. They might be to do with health, and reproductive health. They might be to do with just raising children and parenting responsibilities that fall as a greater burden and a greater responsibility onto women. And being flexible in supporting women through that is what retains them. It's being flexible about working hours, part-time working, just making arrangements that mutually work. I worked for many, many years very happily when my children were young, short days, part-time. It worked a treat for both sides. For the company, it meant that they retained my knowledge. I was always there. They never had to, wait 3 days before Violet was in the office again. And for me, it gave me the contact time with my children. I didn't feel guilty about farming them out to an institution or a stranger for a long working day. And it gave me the ability to sort of maintain my professional standing and my intellectual stimulation. I didn't have to, climb the walls in boredom because I could only talk to a 2-year-old all day. So, win-win, finding those flexible arrangements, but a lot of it is about approaching your employee as an individual. It's not specific to women. And, coming back to questions of intersectionality, people will have their own individual challenges. And as mentors and leaders, we need to find ways to support them through that.
Yeah, and it's quite important to kind of be on the other end to create that sort of environment where women can feel like they can ask.
Yeah.
And not feel
I'm in a stronger position there because they feel easier approaching me as a female manager. They feel they're more likely to get a favourable hearing, and they can also see a bit of that role model thing of, well, she's managed to get there, so she might know how to do that. Yeah.
Well, the best kind of role model, Violet. The best, okay. Absolutely. That must be a really nice position to be in, like your own boss, your own manager is your role model. I think that's amazing. But what would you say are those kind of, because you talked about some of the challenges, I guess. I mean, what would you say or how, sorry, I'm going to rephrase that. You talked about those challenges as well. I mean, have you ever had to challenge even that culture that didn't align with your values, and kind of how did you navigate it?
I have had a few cases where I have found cultural gender biases that really ran against my beliefs and value systems, and that were institutionally denied, and that is difficult to deal with. And ultimately, I had to leave those places, because if the senior management of an organization is unwilling to face the problem, to even recognize that the problem exists, then nothing is going to change there. Nothing is going to get better. And I just had to make the decision that I'm not going to contribute my energies and efforts to an endeavor that behaves like that towards other younger women, perhaps, that I was trying to stand up for. So I would very much challenge it and not put up with it, but I have had cases where there was nothing I could do. It was outside my control, and then I just have my only available option is to withdraw my labour.
I think when you know that there is no battle here to win, and you have to pick them wisely. I think I've had that experience as well, and ultimately, I like to stay in companies for a long time. I don't like to move around, but I've had to stay in one company for less than a year because of that kind of experience.
I think because of my more senior, prominent position, me leaving and saying quite loudly as I left, the reason I'm leaving is this, was probably the most effective thing that I could do to stand a chance of shifting that culture.
Yes. I know exactly what you mean. Absolutely. Yeah. I hope more people, women, and men who kind of feel, and anyone feels like they have the courage to stand up and, make those necessary changes for their own well-being if they need to, and don't feel like they're stuck.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
there's, particularly a younger woman who is on the receiving end of bullying is just unlikely to be able to stand up for themselves. They would have to be a very strong personality indeed. And I think having other people in the workplace that will argue their case and stand up for them is also very important.
Yeah. What's one thing giving you hope about the future of women in tech?
Oh, it has to be the new generation of young grads. They are inspirational to me. They are so brilliant. They're a joy to behold and work with and nurture and grow and cheer them on. They really do give me hope.
Shout out to all the grads. You have a fan
Absolutely.
who loves you guys. No, that's really nice to hear. And I think, I think they don't get enough credit sometimes. So it's really lovely to hear that coming from
I
yourself.
mean, all grads are having a tough time at the moment, so shout out to all of them. But girls in particular, they are fab.
Absolutely. They are absolutely nailing it. And I speak to so many of them, and they are as brilliant as you say. They're just incredible. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our podcast, Violet. It's been so lovely talking to you and so interesting to hear your perspective. Thank you so much for your time. But hopefully we can do it again, maybe in the future.
Yeah, I've had great fun, and if we come up with more questions and topics, we can do it again. Thank you so much.